As we mentioned a bit earlier, we are tracking breaking news at the U.S. Supreme Court. President Trump is asking justices to allow him to continue construction on the White House ballroom. MS Now's Fallon Gallagher enters our group chat unexpectedly. Fallon, we were expecting this to happen. You may not have been expecting to cover it just now. So walk us through what's going on.
Yeah, this is one of the least surprising emergency applications that we've gotten from this president. He, of course, signaled last week after the appeals court upheld the lower court's block on the ballroom that he would appeal to the Supreme Court. He filed this emergency application today. This comes 1 week after the appeals court in a 2-1 ruling upheld the lower court order's block. And that block specifically bars all above ground ballroom construction, but allows below ground national security related construction to continue. Now, what's really interesting here is that once this case got to the appeals process, the Trump administration shifted to making this more about national security. Of course, this came shortly after that shooting that happened at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They're now citing other things that have happened since, including the foiled terror plot on the UFC fight at the White House. And of course, this is really interesting, and specifically in this Supreme Court application, they're now citing that July 8th incident, which caused him to switch Air Force Ones in that catering cart. They're saying that this ballroom is critical for his national security, the ballroom itself. But the hitch here is that this has always been about congressional authorization, and that is what every single court has said at each step of the way. He can have his ballroom as long as he gets that proper congressional authorization. But now this is going to be a question for the Supreme Court to decide.
And Fallon, what do we know about the potential timeline here for the justices?
Yeah, this moves fast. So this is one of those emergency applications. Sometimes they'll rule, they might deny it right away. I would expect this one, they'll set some sort of briefing. They'll request a response from the plaintiffs in this case. That usually takes about a week or so. They'll set a deadline for that. Usually then the administration will reply. And then after that, they can rule at any time. Sometimes that ruling will come within hours of that final response. Sometimes it takes a while. I want to remind you that we are still waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on an emergency case involving the president's elections executive order that would order that citizenship list for people to receive mail ballots. That's been fully briefed for over a week now, and we still haven't gotten a ruling on that. So it is flexible, but much faster than a typical Supreme Court case. Of course, those come on regular decision days, so this could happen at any time.
A masterful pivot, Fallon. Thank you so much for the deep dive on that after you've been covering Luigi Mangione all morning. David, national security concern, the ballroom, much ado about a ballroom.
The judge in the beginning of this case is allowing the construction of a bunker for the president. There was one before, the East Wing was torn down. And so that national security problem is being addressed. And I just want to say more broadly, what the president is doing here is just pushing back against every other branch of the American government. He sort of lost at the Supreme Court earlier on a variety of issues, and he keeps going back at the court and expecting them to rule in his favor. And just lastly, and I'm sorry it's pedantic, but like social studies, if the president wants to build a ballroom, he can go to Congress and they can enact a bill. He had a majority. He had the big, beautiful bill. He chose not to include it. That's the way our, three co-equal branches of government work under American democracy. So I think it's a false argument that this is about national security. This is about the president wanting to build his ballroom without Congress's approval.
Yeah, exactly. As Fallon said, this is about congressional authorization. I do want to get to more information that we're learning about the Trump administration's no-bid contracts. The New York Times is reporting that starting last fall, the Department of Homeland Security spent over $460 million in no-bid contracts on 10 airplanes. They're used airplanes. The Times says, quote, that was an enormous price tag, but the department said it had no time to consider other offers. The planes were needed urgently for deportation flights, but since then, the department has barely used this new fleet for deportations or anything else. David, quickly give us your take on this purchase.
Fantastic reporting by the New York Times. I'll always cheer for journalists. And you just have this contradiction, and I want to let others weigh in on this, where you have a Republican president in not engaging in capitalistic competitive bidding, simply, these direct bids. The same thing happened with the reflecting pool. It was a no-bid contract, a contractor, he had worked with before privately.
The Mar-a-Lago pool guy.
And they did a terrible job.
Okay, so Tim, and internal
That's
government.
true, by the way. That was who he gave the contract to, was his pool guy.
It's Republicans wasting taxpayer money, and the Democrats have done that in the past, to be fair. And the Democrats didn't run the Pentagon well in terms of drones. I meant to say that earlier, but it's astonishing that a Republican president is engaging in so much of this.
Well, and the thing that ties all these things together is Trump uses national security / national emergency to justify acting unilaterally, whether it's imposing tariffs or deporting migrants from U.S. streets or building a ballroom that is a vanity project. Whatever it is, he understands that it allows him, in theory, to override congressional powers of the purse and powers of approval. That's why he's doing it. And secondly, again, they're very poor stewards of American taxpayer dollars in this administration. Those DHS jets, I'm assuming that contract was entered into during Kristi Noem's tenure. We know that she spent flagrantly for things that maybe you shouldn't be spending on when you're running a federal agency, just like Kash Patel, just like the president. They're not responsible with other people's money, and they're not managing the government effectively through it, and they're using national security as a blanket for allowing them to say they can do whatever they want to.
Lizzie, this is clearly not the first time we've seen a no-bid contract. You mentioned the Mar-a-Lago pool guy, but there's also the $7 billion for 11 icebreaker ships. We also saw the fiasco with the reflecting pool. We have seen this with the ballroom itself. The no-bid contract for the ballroom's valued at $500 million. What is going on here? You know, why is the Trump administration circumventing the normal process whereby corporations would bid out for the privilege of building these things?
Because it wants to. Because money matters to them on a more personal, granular level. I mean, Tim has written about the president for decades. This is a little bit like, I don't know, a child who keeps coming out of the bedroom, coming up with other reasons to stay awake. Like, Mommy, I want one more glass of water. Can I have a snack? Can I have one more
We're familiar
story?
with this paradigm.
We're familiar with this paradigm.
Feels triggering.
You're supposed to go to Congress. There are entire wings of the federal government dedicated to procurement. But even back to the very beginning of this term, if you look at DOJ, for example, you know, all of these agencies have inspectors general. They have auditing processes. I am not saying those processes are perfect in any way, shape, or form, but the administration just doesn't want to follow those rules.
Charlie, at the end of the day, you know, we can talk about how ludicrous this seems, but for Americans out there, how does it impact taxpayers? Do we know?
Well, I mean, they're watching how the money is being spent. So, you know, in the beginning, we had DOJ, which was, slashing all these programs because we were fiscal conservatives, right? And then what do we see now? By the way, one of the words I think that we need to resurrect in the English language is boondoggle, wasteful, expensive, completely unnecessary. And everything you have described is a massive boondoggle. And as Tim points out, how ironic that it's taking place under a Republican administration. But whether you're talking about the reflecting pond, whether you're talking about the white elephant Arctic, our Arctic ships, whether you're talking about, all of these, DHS deportation planes. And by the way, you showed a picture of a luxury business jet. That was, taxpayers had to pay for that in order to deport migrants. What you have is this split screen where you're talking about people's economic anxiety in their daily lives. And then they're looking at Washington, D.C. Is Donald Trump draining the swamp, or is he just filling it up with one vanity project after another, one wasteful boondoggle after another? So again, this is one of those things where you hope that voters are going to connect the dots between now and the midterms.
Yeah. Are people paying attention to this? People are struggling out there to pay for gas, to pay for rent. We have been hammering that point. Are people paying attention to no-bid contracts? I mean, obviously, we're here reporting on it. It's important. But, Charlie, what will the implications be for Republicans? And are they going to get questions about this as we head into the midterms?
Well, they ought to. Well, reporters ought to ask questions about this. This ought to be in ads. And the fact is that the average voter, even the average MAGA voter, can understand something like they spend $464 million on planes that are just sitting there. They can understand spending billions of dollars on icebreakers that have no actual purposes. Well, in my conversations, when you say, how do you feel about spending $900 million on a new ballroom or spending millions of dollars on the reflecting pond? People People understand waste, and these numbers are comprehensible. So here's, again, another job for Democrats. Bring it up. Talk about it. Challenge the Republicans when they claim that they are fiscally conservative. Challenge them when they claim that they are prudent. They're prudent, handlers of public wealth, because these are all vulnerabilities, and they go to this whole question of, is Donald Trump, does he think about people like you? Is he concerned about your problems? Or is, as Maggie Haberman has reported, is he spends 70% of his time thinking about monuments about himself rather than how to improve your life?